Hey everyone, it's Veroosh. Welcome to my channel. I'm excited to tell you guys about the Jupiter-Chiron conjunction. A lot of people are contacting me and they're like, I'm upset. I feel weighed down by the current energies. What's going on, Veroosh? It could be Lilith squaring the nodes, and especially if there's aggression involved in your situations, I would be looking to Lilith. But we all are dealing with this conjunction of Jupiter and Chiron that is a huge topic for the entirety of the month. Yes, Saturn switching signs. Yes, Pluto switching signs. But that conjunction is really formative. And by formative, I mean it's forming who we are, our personality, where we stand, all those kinds of things. And so therefore it's really important in our lives. So I'm going to go through this today with you guys to explain to you what Chiron and Aries is and what Jupiter and Chiron mean together. All these different things. I think it's going to be different than maybe other things you've heard online, so maybe it's helpful. There will be some dates, so again, you can get a pen and paper ready and get ready to write down some notes. I already talked about Jupiter and Chiron, Chiron and Aries recently, so I don't want to repeat that information. I haven't found the video in which I talked about it in terms of what it means for us in general, but when I find the video, I'll link it in the description below. So if you want more information on the ingress of Chiron into Aries, please check it out. I also brought out my list of videos I did in 2018, I believe, when Chiron was entering Aries in 2019. For every single sign. So I did an individual sign video for every sign on this transit. So if you want to find out more from your sign, it's linked down below. So go check it out. Okay, so first of all, Chiron, this is for Chiron's themes. We often hear that he's the wounded healer, right? And it's about, the theme is about living with your wounds and living despite of them, or living despite whatever's happened to you, taking care of that, nurturing that, and rising above. And that is definitely the core energy of Chiron. It is about living with wounds, and not necessarily wounds that you can heal easily, and then kind of dealing with that. So that is the core message. But there's other messages in the Chiron stories that I think often get missed. So here they are. It's also, Chiron was a hermit. So when he ended up getting wounded, so first of all, Chiron was a centaur, which is a half man, half horse. And not all centaurs were actually nice or considered good. Chiron was considered one of the good ones. And he had a very good reputation. And everything that's written about him is that of this wonderful patriarchal figure of nurturing and caring. And we'll talk about that more in a minute. So he was a nice horseman, okay? And so when he got hurt, he lived on a mountain in a cave, and he retracted into his cave with the wound and stayed the majority of the time there. And so after the incident that hurt him, many people traveled to him in the cave to actually get help and healing from him. So there's this huge hermit sort of theme that comes along with Chiron. Another major theme of Chiron is child abandonment, actually. And specifically child abandonment by the mother. So I don't mean to trigger anyone today. We're going to talk realistically today. It's not like pessimistic or, you know, optimistic. If you don't know my channel, you will, it's just frank conversation about what's going on. So I'm not going to sugarcoat it because I don't want you to miss the opportunity. And especially a topic like Chiron, we are going to talk about sensitive topics. So if you're, you know, going through stuff at this time, or if you're easily triggered by something, this may be a video in which topics like that come up. So things like childhood traumas, all those kinds of things. I am saying that in order to bring your attention to it. And if I do bring something up, please don't see that as like a scarlet letter or some kind of badge or some kind of stamp that something's going to happen in your life. It's just some feedback for you to think about internally about what's going on in your life and how that is affecting you. So take that with a grain of salt. Think about it and think about how it applies to your life and your experiences. So yes, there's a major theme of child abandonment in Chiron's stories. He was abandoned at birth. His mother rejected him and because of what he looked like. So there's also a theme of, discrimination based on what someone is. And then he actually nurtured children that were brought to him as an adoptive father, particularly Achilles, and he nurtured them and took care of them. And Achilles also was rejected by his mother, who wanted to be immortal. So again, Achilles was not welcome by his mother, and his mother left Achilles. So yes, there's a major theme, and it's a strong theme for men. There's a lot of stories, I would say. Yeah, it affects both genders, but I think particularly for men, the mother abandonment trope, or like the mother abandoning her masculine child, could be particularly resonant. So if you're a man who's watching this might be where you connect with Chiron. But he was also the teacher and a mentor for many, and he was always described, Chiron, as this wonderful, nurturing soul. And so he learned from Apollo, and such things as traditional like warfare with like arms, bows and all sorts of different things. But then he also taught Achilles and others hand combat, but also wisdom, knowledge, and medicine. So he has that connection as this teacher, nurturer, step parent, but also abandoned child. So that is a wound that Chiron lived with his entire life. Maybe that's why he was the nice senator. It's never described in the stories, but what made him different? Maybe he was a more sensitive soul. Anyway, so that's the beautiful side of his story that often gets missed. There's also a huge aspect of healing, of course. So he's the one who is labeled as discovering the medical arts. So he is considered like a herbalist and someone who actually healed his own wounds, but also the wounds of others. He also parented Asclepius, who was associated with necromancy, which sounds really dark at first, but actually it was the idea that they could bring back people from death. So that was in his lineage, and that wasn't said in a dark way. It was just about healing people through even death and bringing them back to life. So it's just a really beautiful energy with that. And so yes, I'm just trying to pick and choose what I tell you guys in the order so it makes sense. He also was often described as having helped soldiers on the brink of death or from battle, and people would be brought to him in critical condition, and he would use particularly herbs to help those people. So that's a huge trope for Chiron. Okay. And then what actually ended up happening was that he got caught in a crossfire when Hercules shot an arrow and wounded him. And on the arrow there was the Hydra's blood, which made the wound not able to be cured. So he had a perpetual wound in his leg, and he was caught in the crossfire. So there's a theme in the Chiron story of being caught in the crossfire between others. And so Hercules was persecuting other senators and shot at them and ended up wounding Chiron. And so Hercules right away went up to Chiron, tried to heal his wounds, but because it was the Hydra's blood, he could not heal it. And so he had this perpetual wound, and Chiron was immortal, so he suffered greatly. And so there was the theme of getting caught in the crossfire, and then also a major theme of being perpetually wounded and actually wanting to be unalived, wanting to not live anymore, which could be a theme also for people. But it was in the context of him being immortal. And so the final major trope of the Chiron image is that of Prometheus, who was the Titan who created humans out of clay and then gave them fire. And he was punished by being picked apart by an eagle. His liver kept on being picked apart by an eagle that was regenerating itself as a punishment for giving humans fire. And so the issue, there's this transformative piece in the Chiron story in which Chiron wants to get rid of, how do you say this? Get rid of his immortality. So he gives up his immortality to Prometheus, and in exchange he gets to pass away and end his suffering. So he never actually healed his wound, which I think is a misconception about him. I think we focus on the fact that he was healing others while he was wounded in that cave, so people would bring people to him in critical condition. He was healing them, but he actually passed away and was turned into a constellation in the sky. So and so there's a little bit of a cross in this story, and it's not, you know, Greek and Roman myth oftentimes is contradictory. It depends who wrote it, and there are different takes on things, so not everything always adds up. But Prometheus, what ends up happening is that he gets immortality, and he also becomes a constellation in the sky. So one of the conditions under which Prometheus was punished, the eagle eating his liver, was that he would perpetually be eaten by the eagle that way every day until an immortal gave up his immortality and rescued him. And so that was a condition that was probably very hard for, they didn't think, like Zeus didn't actually think anybody would do that, none of the immortals. And so there's this narrative in this story that's very complementary to each other, because Prometheus needed an immortal to give up their immortality to be, you know, lifted out of his curse or his punishment, and Chiron needed to get rid of his immortality in order to pass away. So it was this real interlinking of, you know, altruistic characters in Greek and Hellenistic myth that kind of feed into each other, but not really, as you can see, not very directly. So it's kind of interesting. And so those are the major themes: living with wounds, taking care of children, particularly abandonment by the mother or abandonment by parents, teacher of children, mentorship, helping others, healing, getting caught in the crossfire. And when I hear getting caught in the crossfire, because it was his kind, the centaurs that were being pursued by Hercules, they began conflict with him. And so it brings up like social issues of how we are attached to the communities that we're a part of, ethnic communities, religious communities, and so forth, and how people persecute each other based on these types of things. And that theme has really been strong with this Aries transit of Chiron, in my opinion, as people have been defining our responsibilities to each other and our responsibilities to our communities, and how we are persecuted as members of certain communities. So I thought that was very in tune with that. Okay, so and wisdom, herbalism, all these beautiful things. So there's this conjunction between Jupiter and Chiron that's happening in the sky right now. And it's happening concurrently to a lot of different changes. Saturn has just entered Pisces. Pluto is about to enter Aquarius. Lilith is squaring the nodes. And there's this choppy waters energy that's happening until about the 4th week of March, about the 25th of March specifically. We start getting astrological events that are going to start clearing the air. But for now, we are left to deal with these issues. And as Jupiter and Chiron come together, there's a real opportunity for healing that we've already been seeing. And I'll go into that in just a minute. But this whole energy of all these issues being brought up is on a timeline. So we're looking at the 21st of March for the new moon in Aries, as well as the first day of spring, the spring equinox, which is astrologically speaking very significant of the new year, a new start. So this is really a time in which we are contending with very deep themes within our lives that need to be worked out, those themes that I described. And so on the 25th, what we're seeing is that square with Lilith and the nodes breaks. There was another thing, and I forgot. Oh, yes, and the conjunction, coincidentally, between Chiron and Jupiter also starts to break apart on the 25th of March. So it's exact on the 11th, but it actually continues till the 25th. So it's interesting. So really think of this as like a period of time from now until the end of March, until spring, in which those issues that I described really are going to come up in many ways, both socially and for us personally. Now, Chiron is not an asteroid. It's classified as a comet and as a minor planet. Initially, when it was detected or found, it was an asteroid, and I often call it an asteroid, so don't nitpick this. And I don't think that there is a strong consensus on a lot of the definitions in space. So there's a lot of, Pluto kind of discussions back and forth things. But technically Chiron is by one body called a comet, and by another body it's called a minor planet, or it used to be called a dwarf planet, but I don't think that's an appropriate name anymore. It was discovered in 1977. Its orbit is about 50 years, so technically it hasn't reached one full orbit since it's been found. So when you hear astrologers talk about it, we're not working off of hundreds of years of observations and understanding of it. We're really working with less than 50 years. But the very interesting thing about Chiron, in my opinion, is that for an asteroid, see, I did it again, for a comet or a minor planet that has not been detected for a very long time, there are so many astrologers from different backgrounds, different schools of astrology who participate in it, who believe in it. So you'll see Chiron in many charts from many different schools of astrology. So for some reason, it really resonates for many of us. And so, yeah, many astrologers use it. Many astrologers make it very important in their practice. And it's technically a generational planet because its cohort will be between 14 to 19 years or so. So it doesn't have like an equidistant orbit, which means that it's not necessarily always the same in every single sign. And so the cohort is not necessarily consistent. And the cohort means all the people who have Chiron in Pisces, and now we have Chiron in Aries. There's a group of people who have that transit. Okay. And so, yeah, so we're heading up to the point in which Chiron makes its return. It's going to be at 3 degrees of Taurus. So right now we're at about 15 degrees of Aries. So we have several years before that happens, but it's really coming soon. I think it's going to happen in 2026. So mark that on your calendars. In other words, some people really use astrology based off of observational data. It's hard to make observations based on, data that's not there. There's also a second point. There's some people in astrology who don't measure transits before they were detected. So there's like a whole philosophy in astrology that considers that transits should not be measured until we know about them. So in other words, if you were born in before 1977, Chiron doesn't apply to you. But for me, in my practice, my channel started really picking up when Chiron was in Pisces. So the last iteration. And I have to tell you, the amount of people that started coming to me who were born in the 60s and late 60s when Chiron was in Pisces last and having their Chiron returns coincided very directly with the return of Chiron into Pisces. So in other words, when Chiron was transiting Pisces in the mid-2010s, I saw such a huge influx of people going right through very intense returns. Chiron in Pisces, in my opinion, is probably one of the toughest Chirons, and we'll get to that on another day. If you're having your Chiron return right now, that's very significant as well, but I don't think it's as... I think that what I saw with Chiron in Pisces is that people's earths were being really shattered. Their lives were going through incredible, emotionally dense situations. With Chiron and Aries, yes, it's intense and it's hard in some instances, but it involves really literal things, such as self-esteem, self-confidence, who you are in the world, identity issues. With Chiron in Pisces, it felt very displaced. What was hurting, I don't know, and it got very confusing for people. With Chiron and Aries, it's very upfront. Anyway, I talked about Chiron and Aries in a previous video, and in order to keep this succinct, I'm going to find the video and put it in the description, and I'll tell you guys where it is and stuff so you can hear what I say about it there. So I encourage you to check it out if you're curious about what Chiron and Aries represents. But we're focusing on Chiron and Jupiter now, and so they're joining at, what is it, 14 degrees of Aries to 15 degrees. And this is a very significant part of the sky. This is located near the star Alpheratz. This star is an interesting star because it actually represents two constellations. It is one of the stars in the Andromeda Galaxy, actually the alpha star of the Andromeda Galaxy, and it's also a star in the Pegasus Galaxy. And the Pegasus Galaxy is an interesting galaxy with a lot of history. And so this area of the sky has some very neat in Aries, has some very interesting tropical Aries, sorry, has some very interesting themes in it as well. So think about the Chiron themes of, you know, healing, childhood abandonment, childhood nurturing children, education, wisdom, those kinds of things, being a hermit, adjacent to society, getting caught in the crossfire of, you know, systems or like communities clashing, you know, all those things. And so now the themes for this area of the sky, which is sidereal Pisces but tropical Aries, I don't want to confuse guys too much, is considered to be this intersection. Now, Andromeda and Pegasus aren't necessarily, they're linked by myth, but not directly. And so the fact that it kind of connects with the two constellations, it's interesting that it does that. But both the constellations also have similar tropes or similar ideas to them. And that is that it's this kind of an area of the sky that is all focused on transition and transmutation, when one part of the story ends and another begins. So Pegasus was born out of Medusa's decapitation, and Andromeda also went through quite a transformation in that she was a girl who had been sacrificed by her parents out of the request of the gods to save themselves. Then she was rescued and became a queen. So we have this big transformation of like the girl archetype to a grown woman to marriage. And also Pegasus the beautiful horse born out of the monster's head. And I know Medusa is contentious, but for the purpose of our conversation here, we use that trope. Greek and Roman myth is often problematic, and it often contradicts itself because it is so colonial. It took from so many different traditions. And so therefore there is a lot of illogical, incongruent ideas in it that just don't really have a straight answer. So you have to sort of, when you're reading Greek or Roman myth, you have to pick and choose what to focus on at this time. And so certain gods or certain stories represent one thing in one story, but then represent another in another. So I'm not diminishing Medusa's story. I do think it's a feminist story, but for our purpose with Pegasus, the idea here is transformation and the redemption of, you know, evil and how it can transform into something helpful. In fact, it was on Pegasus that Andromeda was rescued. So that was a part of the story. So Pegasus rescues Andromeda in another story. So you have this transformation from darkness to light in the Pegasus idea, and then on the other hand from the child to an adult. They're all signaling transitions of life and transitions of form. The other idea that I really get from this area of the sky coincides with the idea that time changes things, and that's really relevant to Chiron, because Chiron is connected with time a lot because his problem was immortality and wounds, right? And so it is connected with time. And whenever you've been in a difficult situation, one of the hardest circumstances that people come to me with are perpetual situations that it's not easy for them to resolve, like things that you're stuck in. And we get into those things. And so this area of the sky reminds us that even in situations like Andromeda was tied and sacrificed to a sea monster, she thought her life was over, and here comes salvation in the last minute, so to speak. So we all go through times when we think it's over, everything stinks, but truly there is redemption here. So that's the area of the sky that is tropical Aries at about 14 degrees, and it's kind of, again, really ties into this redemption, end of the story, being transformed, consolidating your past experiences or the past history of a story and rising up out of that. Okay, so now let's talk a little bit about like Chiron astrological themes. And so what we're looking at here is Chiron entered Aries in 2019 and will remain in Aries until 2026. And so this is when it will enter Taurus. I have a feeling that with the North Node in Taurus right now between 2021 and 2023, a lot of the issues that came up now are the issues that we will be reconciling when Chiron enters into Taurus. So if you go back to the video I mentioned in the description and you listen to me talk about the Chiron and Aries that really worked on our self-esteem and identity issues and our human rights in the world, are like equity and social justice kind of stuff, like representation for who we are. That was the theme. That is the theme of Chiron and Aries, where everybody's sort of identifying what they are denied in life and where they feel they can do better or where they feel they can, you know, rise above. When Chiron enters Taurus, it's going to be a whole new set of things that we're going to be healing, and maybe like not necessarily easy things to resolve. And so maybe some of those themes have come up while the North Node was in Taurus and continues to be until July. So take a look at now and think about, you know, what are those issues that are coming up for me personally during North Node and Taurus? Where are my blockages happening during this transit? What can I get? What can't I get around? What are the issues? Is it money? Is it health? Because with Taurus, we're going to be talking a lot about tangible material things. What are those things that are coming up? Taurus themes, right? And so this conjunction has already begun. And so it began on March 1st and the 2nd, with the conjunction of Jupiter and Venus. On the 2nd, Venus joined Chiron and probably brought some kind of life and compassion to circumstances. To give you an example, I have a good example of what happened when Venus crossed Chiron, so I'm going to tell you guys right now. This is the part where you want to be writing down dates, but this example is just my observation. So there's a new filter online in social media apps called Bold Glamour, and it's a new type of filter that draws itself on each pixel of our face as opposed to like a mask. So it's much more specific to everyone's face. And so people are, it's like a big trend, it's trending. And so it basically makes people look like very stylized. I don't want to give it a normative value because a lot of people are concerned that it's extremely unhealthy, but it looks very real. And so it's giving people pause, and people are like, wow. And so it's a very dramatic filter that will make you look like a version of yourself as if it's drawn or embellished in some way. And so it doesn't really change your face, but then it contours it in such a way that it really is a striking difference. And because the technology is so specific, it sort of is, it's an evolution of the filters we've been seeing until now. And so this filter actually came out at the time when Venus was crossing Chiron a couple days ago. That's when it became like a trend. And so the idea here is, that I noticed, is that there is this separation of what we are seeing ourselves as through these filters and what we actually are. And even though it seems subtly so similar to what we look, in a practical way, the kinds of cosmetic procedures and what you would need to do to achieve that look would be very expensive, very painful with surgeries, and also like just very, it could cause a lot of self-esteem issues. So you kind of look like, I don't want to say a positive, but like a stylized version of yourself. It's very dramatic. You guys, I hope you guys know what I'm talking about. And so as these filters are no longer masks that just cover our face and just actually pinpoints very specific pixels on our face, you can run your hand across it and you can't see that you have a filter on your face. And that will cause dysphoria. That will cause a separation and an expectation of what we should look like, or what we should be, or what we have to be. And so this is the dawn of this new era, and that's deeply connected with Aries themes of I am, and these themes of femininity, and these themes of, you know, perpetual identity issues of who we are and what we could be. Even people with tons of money are chasing beauty standards that are impossible to maintain, that are impossible to keep. And so it's just interesting that that filter became so popular while Venus was crossing Chiron. So I thought that was interesting. Okay, so that can be kind of alarming, that this could be a theme that we're going to be facing it now. A lot of the things talking about Chiron right now have been focused on, you know, identity, social justice issues, those kinds of things, and they're there. But now with this filter, it feels as though modification of the self and our virtual representation of the self can, like, at least in some people's eyes, outperform what their real self can do. And so it becomes another head game that we have to deal with, and especially as women who have huge beauty standards put on us already. This is just adding another layer to it. So, you know, go check it out and let me know what you think. I did a video, the full moon video that I did last, talked about the next transit, which was the March 5th one. And so this was when the midpoint happened between Uranus and the Sun. And so again, around March 5th, through this full moon that happened in, where was the full moon? In Virgo. So through those couple days, what did arise in terms of your self-confidence with Chiron? And the self-confidence that could be arising with this transit of Chiron in Aries could be something that involves, how do you say this, like understanding why things are the way they are, or how you relate to others and why that's the case. Some of these self-awarenesses could be very brutal, and they can be like eye-opening moments of like raw emotion. So don't be shy to look at your dark thoughts on March 5th through the 7th. Look back in your text messages, journal, whatever, and see what you were thinking, or see where your head was at, what kind of issues were coming up, because it's likely that this midpoint between the Sun and Uranus was in some way empowering you to rise up from some lowered state and recognize how you are limiting yourself, or how the outside world is limiting you. Okay, so this conjunction between Jupiter and Chiron, this is actually really turning out to be long, so I might just do without the all signs for you today, because I'm at 35 minutes already, but there are those videos for all signs in the description, so check those out instead. Okay, so sorry, but it's 35 minutes, it's long enough. So anyway, but I want to get through the next part, because you have to kind of talk about one thing to understand the next. Okay, so here's the next point. And now we're getting really into the Chiron Jupiter. So we've covered Aries and what this area of the sky represents, this transformative point, and the end of a chapter, beginning of a new one. And then Chiron itself, we had a really good talk about what Chiron is and some of the early transits of this transit. The whole Chiron stellium that we've been under began about February 20th with an aspect to the moon. So you're looking at a time period between February 20th and the 25th. However, right now on the 11th and 12th is when Chiron and Jupiter join together. And this is a conjunction that happens on a cyclical nature. The cycle isn't exactly the same, so it's not always going to be every X number of years. Oftentimes they do come together every 14 years, but like between 1990 and 2009, it took them 19 years to come back together. And so this cycle is irregular, but it's a cycle in which when Jupiter and Chiron join together, we take on the energies of the sign in which they joined together in. So for example, last time they joined was in 2009 in Aquarius, and so we can see how social issues and internet media, social media have become these battlegrounds, emotional battlegrounds for people, of finding community, finding each other, working through social issues. And so that was the cycle of Chiron and Chiron Jupiter conjunction in Aries. And so now we have this new conjunction that's happening. Excuse me, the last conjunction happened in Aquarius. This new conjunction is happening in Aries, but that's a part of a larger series of conjunctions that goes back to 1976. So unlike other patterns like the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction that's always an air sign, the conjunction between Chiron and Jupiter is not necessarily in the same sign all the time. However, over a period of about 150 years, Jupiter and Chiron will join together in Aries. The first conjunction was in 1976, and now we have the second one at 14 degrees in 2023, and the next conjunction will be in 2070 in 4 degrees of Aries. So amid all these other times in which Jupiter and Chiron meet, we are on a larger cycle of these 15-year conjunctions, I'm just abbreviating, in which Jupiter and Chiron are working our self-esteem. Now, I wasn't alive in 1976, but when you can watch a movie or look back in history, you can find that in about 76, people were really breaking away from old norms, all old standards. The 70s were a really interesting time of liberation that we sometimes don't appreciate it for, because it's not flower power, daisy, whatever, you know, and hair musical type things. But it had its own flavor of independence. And I don't know if you guys know this musician. I really like Frank Zappa. And this is when, in my opinion, his music became really prolific. Also Pink Floyd, bands like that were very famous at that time. So it wasn't like an in-your-face, a search for freedom in the 70s, but it was this search for autonomy. So I think when Chiron and Jupiter started joining in 1976, it really forcefully broke us away from some stereotypes about who we were as individuals. And so I think this conjunction is going to mirror that, and we're going to have this very, I don't mean violent in a negative sense, but very abrupt and very intense breakaway from all the things we've been. What comes to mind is like the early 2010s kind of like boho chic kind of BS, frankly, where all these people were dressing up in these performative ways and nobody was happy, and everybody was like fitting into their skinny jeans and like really making themselves uncomfortable, honestly, and appropriating from other cultures and just really out of touch with who they were, I would say, for the majority of people. And so I think that we're going to really rebel out against from that kind of like TV sitcom, commercialized mall aesthetic. And so when this conjunction's happening now, I think we're going to have this real kind of breakaway from that. And I love the mid-70s in terms of style. So I think we're going to get, that's going to be expressed through that. This sort of like, it's not like a peace and no war kind of mentality. It's an energy of abrupt, brutal independence. Also, punk in the mid-70s really rose up to prominence. There was a lot of movements. Rap became like gained its own footing in the late 70s. It was just like there's like a grittiness, a rawness to it that I think is going to be really good. So I think we're about to hit that kind of reset again and change into a new path. And I think that is being marked by the Jupiter Chiron conjunction. Okay, so that's the three and the next one's in 2070, so I'll tell you guys then about that. I'll be old, but hopefully some of you will still be watching me then. Okay. so yeah, so think of it as we're in the middle cycle of these three Chiron conjunctions between Jupiter and Chiron and Aries, and this is the one that's kind of, I think, the pinnacle point. And you can look back to the 70s to understand what that energy was about. Okay, the last conjunction I talked about was in Aquarius. That is also on a pattern. So there is 2 conjunctions in Aquarius. They are triple conjunctions, which means that Chiron and Jupiter meet 3 times in Aquarius each time. The first time was 2009. The next one is 2056. And so that will be a part of these revolutions that have a lot to do with technology and are contending with society, who we are in society. And that's the cycle that's just come to an end, this social media revolution. Okay. So we talk, and so the last kind of example, it's not really a big deal, but just so you can kind of catch the vibe. In 1990, the conjunction was actually in Cancer, and Cancer is really connected to females and the mother archetype. And so in the 90s, what happened, we had Lilith Fair, we had this huge revival of feminist, or even if it's performative feminism, we had these like women's issues that really took center stage. A lot of government heads of state were women. A lot of government heads of state were women, and so they took center office. My dad drove by in the street, so I was like, oh, he has a tendency to pull over. He was probably looking to see what I was doing. But anyway, I've trained him not to interrupt. Okay, so and the next conjunction is in Gemini, so that's also important. The next conjunction is going to be in 2036, and if you know anything about the next decade, there's a huge emphasis on Gemini energy, and so I think that's really interesting because, again, when the conjunction happens between Jupiter and Chiron and Gemini, we're going to be dealing with the consequences of everything this decade is going to bring up, and that's Gemini stuff, which we'll talk about a lot. There's going to be a lot of changes. Gemini is very fast moving. It's going to be an interesting energy for us to go through, and we're going to do that healing in 2036. Okay. So the last thing that I want to say is that and write this down, there are a couple conjunctions later in March that really reconcile this. So we have this conjunction, the cyclical conjunction between Jupiter and Chiron right now, and then we will hit a conjunction between Mercury and Chiron on March 26th. So Mercury will enter Aries, and at the end of March form a conjunction at about 18 degrees with Chiron. And then on the 28th, Mercury will form a conjunction with Jupiter, which will have passed Chiron. And so again, it's going to bring up these issues that we've been talking about and bring more healing, more opportunities. The whole month is this month of issues rising up, us seeing what those issues are and reconciling them. And then on the 5th of April, the Sun will form a conjunction with Chiron. And then on the 11th of April, the Sun will form a conjunction with Jupiter. So everything from March 1st, when Jupiter and Venus form their conjunction, to the conjunction with the Sun in April, is going to be this whole space of healing our identities, transforming in relation to communities, getting misrepresented by our community. That's also a theme, like the Hercules chasing the centaurs and wounding Chiron, and who we are in relation to these communities as individuals. So I think it's a really beautiful transit. I hope I've done it justice in explaining it to you guys. I know some of you guys, I really want to, well, it's a really long explanation. So how do we say this? We'll save it for another day, right? But maybe I can pull some cards just for the end. We have this 9 of Cups. And then we have the World card. And then we have the King of Swords, Gemini, Aquarius, or Libra. And then we have the 4 of Cups. Okay. So I feel as though this is like a very benefic energy that's coming in for help. This is an energy that's coming in to provide help and support in some way. There's something that is, this is Jupiter in Pisces, but there's something that is coming in that is a blessing that is meant to elevate and that connects someone with the world in a very positive way. There's opportunity for celebration, and there's a huge energy of uplift energy as well. There's an energy here of someone coming in with an offer, and I feel as though make sure that you recognize, and this is actually something I picked up already about this transit, recognize what it is and recognize what it's good for. The 4 of Cups to me signifies this see a good thing in front of you for what it is. So with these Chiron Jupiter conjunction, the thoughts and ideas or the realizations may not be self-apparent. So you may not be fully aware of all the benefits that it's bringing to you or someone is bringing to you. And so the challenge here for you is to recognize the blessing behind the mundane things that are happening in front of you, because there's something special here that's elevating. Okay, so I know this was very detailed, and I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you guys have a good night, and I will talk with you soon again. Take care. Bye.